All right. Well, hello again, everybody, and hello to you online as well. The last couple of weeks, I talked a little bit about this refuge and bodhicitta verse, and then Genzendru also talked about it yesterday as well. I mean, it is like an essential verse, and we recite it all the time. So it's good to have that familiarity with understanding what the meaning is behind this refuge and bodhicitta verse, so that it really serves to correct our motivation at the start of any virtuous practice. Because it's important to have a good motivation at the start, and it's important to have a good dedication at the end, because it's the motivation and the dedication together that make whatever virtuous activity you're engaging in, whether it's like meditation, whether it's like practicing generosity, these kinds of things, or whether it's doing study. So it's what makes that virtuous practice act as a cause for attaining, the result that we want, which is Buddhahood, enlightenment. So that's why the two are so important. So it is important to not just to say the words and not reflect on the meaning. So last week, I was talking about, what it really means to go for refuge in those first two lines. We're talking about not just like protect me from suffering, asking some beings external to us to protect us from suffering. Really, when we go for refuge, it's about asking or, requesting for some assistance so that we can transform our own minds. That's the whole point of going for refuge, so that we can actually gain these realizations and cessations of suffering within our own minds. That's the whole point of refuge. And then also with bodhicitta, that's to make sure that our virtuous activity acts as a cause for attaining the realizations on the Mahayana path. Not just any kind of realizations, but specifically ones related to the Mahayana. We have the bodhicitta. So also contained within this verse as well, it talks about, there's not an explicit mention, but when His Holiness talks about this verse, and many masters, but His Holiness does especially, says, when you read through the lines, we don't have it in English here, but the first line says, Sangye Chodan Sopi Chonwa, so that's to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. That says, Jangshu Badu Dani Kapsuchi. So I go for refuge. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to these beings. So it's me, I'm the one that's going for refuge. And then in the next line, Dagi Chunyengi Pesenki. So the Da again says I. It's talking about I. So through the merits or through the accumulations that I collect through my practices of generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings. So it's talking about I. It mentions I twice in this verse. I go for refuge, and then through the merits that I create, or through the accumulations, the collections of merit and exalted knowledge that I create, may I become a Buddha. So when we mention this one word, I, then we should really use that as a basis for reflecting on the correct view. So when we talk about I, me, what is this me? So we can talk about a me or an I that exists and an I that does not exist. So the I that is mentioned here is the I that exists. It's the I that is imputed onto this body and mind that we call the basis for the designation of I. So that I that's imputed onto the body and mind, that doesn't exist from the side of the body and mind. So if you search amongst that basis for designating I, the body and mind, you actually lose the I. If you think about the physical body that we have, so we've got, it looks like one thing. Well, it is one thing, but it's actually a collection of many bits, isn't it? Many parts. You search within all of those various bits of the body, the skin, the bones, the muscles, the blood, all the other bits and pieces, the organs, the various organs, heart, lungs, etc. There is not one thing in there that you can point to and say, that is I, that is me. And likewise, when you look at the I, the mind. The mind is also made up of many, many bits and pieces. We've got some positive bits, some negative bits, got some neutral bits in there. There are minds, there are mental factors, all sorts of things within mind. And there's not one thing that you can point to in there that is I. When you search amongst all those bits within the body and the mind, there is no thing that you can actually say, that is I, that is me. And that's really because the I is just imputed onto this collection here that we have, this body and mind collection. It doesn't, it all exists from this side. It's not how it appears to us. It appears very much that there is some concrete, solid I, me, that is here, that can be helped, that can be harmed. You know, if somebody says something nice to me, there is some I from the side of this basis of body and mind that is like, you know, rose or rosy, you know, it's like helped like this. Or when somebody says something really nasty, there is some like solid me, I here from this side of this collection here that is harmed in some way. But it's not actually the case. There is actually no I. There's no me that exists from the side of this thing that you can point to within this basis of body and mind. It's just imputed onto that. But through not understanding that, we grasp, we cling to this idea that there is some concrete I, me, here, from the side of this collection here that can be helped or harmed. And so then we react and we push away things that cause us, you know, think that that's going to cause this concrete I, me suffering. And we pull towards us those things that we think are going to make this concrete I happy. So it's our misunderstanding, you know, and our grasping that the I actually exists in the way that it appears to us as a concrete, solid thing from the side of this basis of collection, the basis of designation, that creates all of these problems for us. So that the I existing in the way that it appears from the side of this collection, that is the non-existent I. That's the one that you need to refute, you need to negate. The one that actually exists is the one that is merely imputed by language and conception onto this basis. It's much more sort of like an easygoing kind of idea, you could say. One that's just imputed. It's merely imputed. Nothing at all from the side of that basis, that collection. So whenever we recite this verse, there's sort of really three things in here to remember. So we've got the going for refuge. The going for refuge is what really makes someone a Buddhist, when you go for refuge from the base of the depths of your heart. We've got the generating bodhicitta, which in here contains the two aspirations, which I'm sure you've heard of, but we'll talk a bit more about today. Contains the two aspirations within those last two lines. And that's what makes our practice the practice of the Mahayana, the great vehicle. And then there's also this recollection of correct view whenever we say this term I. So it's actually an amazing practice, isn't it? When you think just these 4 lines of refuge and bodhicitta, really amazing. There's so much contained within those. You've got a question, Susan, you can see.
So here we are, we've got our refuge I, we've got our connection. Where's the motivation coming?
Where's the motivation coming from in terms of like generating bodhicitta?
No, in terms of the source of this this wanting to do this. Maybe I was saying this I that we take ourselves to be really exist. But I'm also quite sure what
it exists. It does exist. It just doesn't exist in the way that it appears to us to exist.
Oh, okay. So we might assume that.
Well, there's still an existent I. There is an I that is designated onto the body and mind. So when we say the I is merely designated onto the body and mind, it's not saying that the I doesn't exist at all. It just doesn't exist in this really solid way, this concrete way, this independent way that we grasp it to exist. So if you come to understand that the I is merely imputed onto its basis of designation, then it really frees you up. right? So you're not having to protect this independent me or I, because actually that thing doesn't exist at all. But there is still an I. There's still an I that experiences happiness. There's an I that experiences suffering. We can still talk about an I or a person who is a good person or who is a bad person. It's really, though, it's not that that good or bad person exists independently as a good or bad person. It's really independence upon what their mind is doing, and then, you know, by extension, what their body does, because the mind is really the one that impels the actions of the body and speech. And then on that basis, we say that person that is imputed onto the collection of the mind and the body that is doing the actions, and we say that person is bad, or we say that person is good. But it's because they're imputed independence upon that basis, the body and mind, that we can say that they're good or bad, or a person can go from being a bad person to being a good person.
There is a distorted view.
The one that grasps that an independent, concrete I. Yep, it's a distorted view. So not only is it distorted, it's wrong.
Yeah. And it comes from this whole grasping. What you were saying with the equanimity.
Yep, that's right. And all the things, like all the problems with our anger, our attachment and pride and jealousy that stop us from having this equanimity, this equal balanced attitude towards all sentient beings, that's all really rooted in this wrong grasping that sits right at the root, that ignorance of how we wrongly grasp at ourselves to exist. That sits at the root, and then all these other afflictions come up on dependence upon it, like anger, like attachment, like pride, like jealousy. And then we engage in like bad behavior of body and speech. Sometimes in dependence upon holding to a concrete, solid I, me, then we engage in positive actions as well. So it's not that all of our actions are negative, but the ones that create problems for us are all those negative actions. Yeah. So there is an I that exists. There is an I that experiences happiness, that experiences suffering. There's an I that does good things, an I that does bad things. But there's also an I that doesn't exist. That's really the one that creates all the problems. Well, it doesn't create, it's our grasping to it that creates all the problems. So we want to really identify well how I, me, actually exists in relation to my body and mind. I exist independence upon my body and mind. I don't exist from the side of my body and mind. I also don't exist completely independently from my body and mind. There's no like I that I can put here and then have the body and mind over here. It's not possible. The I is actually, you can say, is a single entity with the body and mind. So the I exists here, but it doesn't exist from the side of this collection in the sense that there is nothing that actually within that collection of body and mind that is the I. It's merely imputed independence upon that body and mind. And it's imputed through language and conception. So we use language, we use thoughts to impute things. It's like we can say the classic example of the clock. To Geshe Sonam always use clock. Use flower or cup. Yeah, so it's usually something that is to hand on the table. When we talk about these, you know, in terms of an analogy or an easier example to understand. So we've got a clock here. So we all call that a clock, don't we? And it seems to us like this is a clock, like in and of itself. Doesn't require anything else to happen for this to be a clock. It's how it seems, right? That's right. It's not how it is, but this is how it appears to us. It appears to us as though there is a clock that exists here independent of anything else. Just it's got its own kind of clockness that exists here. But if that were the case, you'd be able to identify something specifically within this that is clock, because this has lots and lots of parts, doesn't it? So you can say, okay, well, if we took it apart, which I won't do, but we can take it apart and you'll find like there's a circuit board, I presume, in here. It's probably old enough to still have a circuit board. It's got a battery. It's got all this plastic stuff here. There's all sorts of like, I don't know, other stuff in there, electronic stuff. I don't know. If it was like an old school analog clock, I feel like I could explain this much better, because you'd have like the hands and all that. But we don't have that. There's a whole lot of plastic stuff. There's a whole lot of electronic stuff. There's a battery, all those things. So if this really is the clock from the side of this thing as it appears to us, then we'd be able to, when we take all those parts apart, we'll be able to point to something amongst all those parts and say, that is the actual clock. That's the real clock. But actually, if you took all those bits apart, you'd lose the clock. There would be no clock. There would be nothing that we could call a clock. So I guess you're thinking, yes, but actually it's all the bits together. That's the clock. So if it's all the bits together, then we could pile all those bits, take them apart, pile all the bits in a heap, and that would be a clock. But it's still not a clock, is it? And in fact, even when like the very first person who made a clock, like obviously it wasn't one like this, but somebody who came up with the idea of creating a timepiece. Right? So they created a timepiece that they were going to call a clock. So they put together all these things, made sure it worked in the way that it should, so it could tell the time. So even at that point, right, before they'd labeled it, it was working, it's functioning as what we today know as a clock. Even at that point, it wasn't a clock. Like you'd think it would be a clock at that point. It wasn't a clock. So it was not a clock until they gave the label clock to it. So someone had to come up with the idea. So they had the thought to create something by which you could tell the time. And they also had to come up, maybe it wasn't even the person themselves, maybe somebody else came along and said, you should call that a clock. And it's only at that very point where they designate clock to this, the collection is all working in this particular way, when they designate clock to this, that it became a clock. So if clock existed from the side of what we call the basis for designating clock, so it would be this, or in the old days when clock was first designated, it was a different kind of shape and stuff, but anyway, same principle. So if clock existed, like when you had all the working parts come together, it was all in the right order and everything, and it was working as it currently works today. So if that existed, if clock existed from the side of that basis, that working basis, then no one would ever need to apply the term clock to this, because clock would already exist from the side of this. That's not how things come into existence. You always need to have a label that is designated onto the thing for it to become that thing. It's like the same thing as you could say, for instance, so Rob. So Rob was born at some point, quite a few years ago, getting longer by the day. Yeah. So when you first were born, had your mum and dad already come up with the name Rob? Yeah, so there you go. So actually Rob didn't exist when he first came into the world. Rob only was established sometime after, days, months, years, days. So there were a few names that were going around, what we're going to decide on. And then once they decided on Rob being the name, Rob came into existence. Prior to that point, there was no Rob. There was a little baby, but there was no Rob. But to us, it appears as though Rob exists, there from the side of that basis, that body and mind. But if that were the case, then when he first came out into the world, kicking and screaming, they wouldn't have been able to think of like, maybe there's a different name we could give this baby. Like he would have just been screaming Rob from his own side. I mean, it's quite subtle. It is very subtle, actually, but it is a very essential point. So there is a Rob. There's definitely a Rob.
Then Rob goes on to collect all kinds of problems. Part of his being Rob.
That's true, yes. His personality, which grows over the years. That's all arises independence upon various factors, doesn't it? That also doesn't exist from the side of Rob. Came about in dependence upon a whole lot of different causes and conditions. So there would have been the experiences he went through as a child, as a teenager, all those things, and also the various imprints that he had within his own mental continuum. So they encounter various conditions, and that creates, that allows them to ripen into results. And so through all these causes and conditions coming together now, here's the Rob that he is today. If he had have encountered different causes and conditions as he grew up, he would be like a different type of Rob. But it's not how it appears to us. It appears like there's this concrete Rob out there that's always been like this, that will always be like that. So you get this distinction between there being an I that does exist, that has all these experiences established through causes and conditions, doesn't exist from the side of this basis of designation. And there's also this I that doesn't exist, the one that we grasp as how things exist, this independent one, doesn't depend on any causes and conditions, doesn't depend on somebody labeling that I. So if we can recollect that also when we recite this verse and we say, I go for refuge, through the merits that I accumulate, through the collections that I accumulate, then we've got also the correct view in there. So we've got refuge, we've got bodhicitta, we've got correct view. Now also contained within bodhicitta, you can say, is also renunciation. So we talk about these three principal aspects of the path, don't we? Of renunciation, bodhicitta, correct view. We need all three. So although renunciation is not explicitly mentioned there, we can say that renunciation is included within the meaning of bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment. Because renunciation is a striving for liberation. So a liberation, what we usually talk of as being that liberation of the Hinayana path, it's just a cessation of suffering and its causes. But actually we can say that here, bodhicitta encapsulates the meaning of renunciation within it, because with bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, you're striving for enlightenment. When you strive for enlightenment, like implicitly within that, you're striving for a non-abiding nirvana. So it's a type of liberation of the great vehicle. So with bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, you're striving for enlightenment, for great enlightenment. When you achieve enlightenment, you also achieve what's called non-abiding nirvana. So there is a nirvana of the Hinayana path, and then there is a non-abiding nirvana of the Mahayana path. So that's a type of nirvana or liberation where you're not abiding in just the peace of liberation. So not abide, so that's why they call it a non-abiding nirvana. Also working for the welfare of sentient beings. So when you strive for enlightenment, so implicitly together with that, you're striving for a non-abiding. So that's why you can say that renunciation, which is really a striving, it's like a striving for liberation, is included within the mind of enlightenment. It's not a striving for a Hinayana liberation, it's striving for this type of a liberation or a non-abiding nirvana of the great vehicle. Oh, sorry, have I? Oh, I'll tell you what's happened is the microphone's gone off.
Is the battery?
Yeah, batteries.
I thought the battery was
Flashing. Is it working? Am I working? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just let me know if it happens again. Yeah, we do have only one bar. Right, we'll see how we go. So that's for that refuge and bodhicitta verse. So you might be thinking, oh, I already know this. I've heard it many times. But this is like one of the things about when we talk about Buddhist practice. Okay. Should we put those in instead?
So, mate, I'll do this.
I'll have some tea. No, the tea's fine. Thank you. That's good. Yvonne and Liz, if you have questions, you have to maybe just take yourselves off mute because I might not sort of see your hand there. So just shout out. Whoops. Okay, we're all right now? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you might be thinking, well, refuge and bodhicitta, I've had so many explanations on it. I already know. But one of the things about when we talk about Buddhist practice is all about familiarizing our mind. That's really what it's about. So whatever, and when we look at meditation, for instance, meditation basically means familiarization or habituation. That's the word in Tibetan. So what we're really trying to do is change our habituation from where it has been since beginningless time, to a more positive way. So we want to make it so that our minds naturally react in positive ways, not in the sort of self-cherishing and negative ways that up until now it's been reacting. So since we're talking about habituation that we have over beginningless lives, that with the negative, with the selfish way of thinking. So that's since beginningless time. So now the habituation that we have to acquire with positive, with cherishing others, those kind of states of mind, has to also be like really extensive. So just knowing something like, through having read it or having heard it a few times, we'd say is not sufficient. We have to think about these things again and again. We have to listen to teachings on them again and again and again, again and again and again. So it's not just like Rinpoche, Khensa Rinpoche over in Brisbane used to say, Westerners like to say, I know, I've heard it before, I know. He said, knowing is not enough. It has to be like right in your mind so that is your first reaction. You use that information that you've learned and you've habituated to the point where that is your first reaction. That's the thing that comes to the front of your mind whenever whatever it is that you're doing. That's what we need to do. So studying, coming to classes is actually like a really, like it's sort of one of the easier ways to gain this kind of habituation, because you don't really have to do the work yourself. When you're doing, for instance, meditation and analysis, so then you have to do quite a bit of work yourself and you're relying only on what you yourself know. Whereas when you come to class, even if you've heard it before, even if you don't hear anything new that you've never heard before, it reinforces what you've learned so far. It, makes that habituation stronger and stronger. And it's like you don't have to worry about whether you're going down the right track with your way of thinking. Someone else is really doing it for you. Obviously, you want to make sure you've got like good teachers, not just listen to anybody and just accept what they say, leave your powers of analysis and logic at the door, and then come in and go, oh, what they say is probably must be right. So you want to make sure the teacher is good, but it is like kind of the easy way to gain that habituation. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to ask you. You referred to three aspects in relation to the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. Were they in relation to I that you were talking about, or were they in relation to renunciation, bodhicitta, and collective view?
Well, the three that are explicitly mentioned, just are the three in relation to that verse itself. So we've got refuge, bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, and then correct view.
Okay.
So those are the ones that are sort of explicitly present. I mean, you could say even the correct view is not like explicitly mentioned in the prayer, but through reciting the I, then it's like you can reflect on the meaning. You reflect on the lack of inherent existence of the I at that point.
Okay.
Renunciation is not explicitly mentioned, but you can understand it as being included. It's included as part of the mind of enlightenment.
Okay.
Yeah. So in a sense, we've got 4 aspects here for this refuge and bodhicitta verse. 3 that are more sort of like obvious, you could say. 2 that are very obvious, refuge and bodhicitta. 1 that through understanding correct view, you can come to apply whenever you say I. Think about how it's merely imputed through language and conception. Doesn't exist from the side of the basis of designation, the body and mind. And then the 4th one, renunciation, which is included within the meaning of the mind of enlightenment. Hi, come on in. Come in. Yeah, so we have these 4 aspects included within that. Yeah. Okay, so what we've been talking about is really the mind of enlightenment the last couple of weeks. So you've all had explanations on that, I dare say, quite a lot. And Cheki's already taught about it for like 6 weeks, so it should be really in your minds. But like I was just saying, we need to have as much familiarity with these things as possible. So as much repetition as we can. That's excellent. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, I already know it. I don't need to hear it again.
Well, often we can't remember.
Also, there's that problem, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you can't remember, and then obviously you need a bit more familiarity.
Yes, and you know, as Gen Sundra was saying last night, he was saying, you know, talk about when you split up our lives. So when you're a young person, you don't pay attention to the Dharma. You know, you're not interested. You just kind of want to run around and do your own thing. When you're very small, of course, it's like you don't. It's not even on your radar. And then you're a teenager. It's like, yeah, you're not going to listen to any of that. Then when you're in the middle of your life, which is like the optimum time to be actually studying and practicing Dharma, you're very busy. Everybody's very busy. They've got their jobs, they've got their family. You know, that's where your focus is in life. And then once you get to the last part of your life, when you're older, that's when you have the time. But that's when you're older, so you don't have the physical health, for instance. And also, you know, we could add in there the memory goes downhill, doesn't it? So, but that's not to say, therefore, we should go, oh, my memory's no good. You know, forget about it. Wait till next life. I've heard sometimes people say, well, I'll place the imprints in this life, and then next life, you know, maybe I'll be lucky enough to attain rebirth as, say, a monk, and I'll be able to, you know, take rebirth in India, somewhere near the Tibetan settlements, you know, where they can then become a monk and then go into a monastery and everything will be great. It's like you don't want to be pinning your hopes on that. Doesn't matter, whatever time you have left, whatever memory capacity you have left, you just keep working at it.
I don't need memory so much to the point of being able to remember, but the mind's resistance to absorbing views that are contrary to the words that it normally holds. More like there's some sort of, well, I find, you know, even when I really, really want to remember stuff, it still eludes me. Yeah.
Because you don't like, it doesn't accord with your normal way of thinking.
I think there's a part that I think everything that we've thought up until this point, I mean, it's how we got here, isn't it? I mean, seriously, you know, with our wrong view, so it takes a bit to.
So,
the very practice that you're other way practice as much differently to come to it. So you've created, you know, your pretty older view were habitual practices, you're always thinking, you were taught a certain way, you learned a certain thing, and that's how you practice, you grew up in a good environment, whatever it is. And then when you bring something new, it's first there's the learning part, and then there's the practicing part. So then when it arises, when something arises, your brain goes to the new way of thinking, because you practice to create that neural pathway from a science perspective. But it's the practice part that the way that it becomes easy. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I think there's that process, but I think there are also retrograde processes, right? You know, and maybe I can't describe that very well, but maybe there are even things that we're not conscious of, you know, that are disagreeing with what you're hearing. But unless you can catch that subconscious it may not be so easy to absorb it because it is going to change you.
And I think that's actually one of the reasons why His Holiness often says it's best to stick with the religion that you're brought up in. You know, because it's like our formative years when we're a child, that's really when our habits get more set for this life, you know. And so it's quite hard for somebody, say, who's brought up very strict, say Catholic, for instance, with a very strong view, even though you might go, oh yeah, I mean, I can see how that maybe doesn't fit with me anymore. I don't believe in all of that stuff. Because it's so set within your mind at such an early age, it's quite difficult to then take on a completely different way of thinking about the world, say a Buddhist view or some other religious view. You know, it becomes more difficult because even though you might say, oh, I don't believe in that stuff anymore, it does tend to sit in your mind, I think, through that habituation. It's not to say that therefore you shouldn't. If that's the way you want to go, you can definitely change your view, change your religion. But that's just, I think, one of the reasons why His Holiness says it's best to stay within what you were brought up in. Yeah. But I think also, you know, it's like even if you don't have that kind of upbringing, there are views that we can hold from a very early age and we don't even notice that we have them. And so you start to learn other things like what we're learning here, and you don't really understand why is it not really going into my mind in that beyond the, yeah, I understand, yeah, I accept it. It's not going into that deeper conviction level, like, yeah, that's definitely how it is. You know, so that it's more transformative for our minds. And I think for that, sometimes what we need to do is really spend some time analysing our own views that are held within our mind. And that's often where meditation is quite helpful. You know, like you'll find some of those things will come in retreat, for instance, where you're doing very intensive meditation on topics and you're struggling with a particular topic. Why am I struggling with this topic? Start to analyse what are the views that I hold. So this is where logic and reasoning, you know, studying on Thursday nights is extremely helpful. When you're on your own, you're trying to sort out which of the views within your mind are correct and which are wrong. If you've only got yourself to rely on to determine that, you need to have really good ability to use logic and reasoning. So if you can analyse well your own mind and see, well, actually, I hold this view, but what are the reasons that I use to back up that view, to support that view? Are those reasons actually correct? Or are they wrong reasons? What would be a correct reason instead? You know, what would be a correct way of approach to this point? So it's really only when you start to analyse your own mind that you can start to really root out those wrong views, those wrong ideas that are sort of underpinning your more conscious views and perhaps are like contradicting or making it so that it's difficult to really draw in what we're studying here and hold it at a deeper kind of conviction level.
Yeah.
So it might be to do with that.
I think I'm also sort of I don't want to.
No, I think questions are good, and because, you know, other people might have not had a question that you have, but then when we talk about the question that you have, like, oh yeah, I can see it can be helpful for everybody. So So don't feel like you can't ask questions. Yeah. Anyway, have a think about it.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying is quite. But then the other thing is, it's like emotional content. It's like you realise you're having an emotional response, but that isn't particularly valid. Right? Then you go, I go sort of, you know, what's it come from? Well, I think that person. So I think that's what this is like the side step. That's another whole process of analysis that's based in emotion, but it's also got lots of thoughts.
Yeah, well, all our emotional responses are preceded by what we call like a type of, usually an improper mental attention. That's the technical word that's used for it. So there's usually, you know, an event happens in our life, and then, so there's an event that happens, and then at some point we'll have an emotional response to it. If it's like whether it's a positive event or a negative event. Let's look at a negative event. So say something happens, like somebody is a bit mean to us, and that leads to us getting upset, which then leads to us getting angry. So the event in and of itself doesn't have to lead to getting upset and getting angry. Really what draws the line, you know, connects the event to the upset and the angry is what we call improper mental attention. Mental attention. Yeah. So this is a technical word that's used in philosophical texts. So what it is it's like, okay, so the event happens, then it's the way that we think about the event. So we start to go, that person is so mean. Why did they do that to me? You know, what right do they have to do that to me? I'm a good person. What's going on? Or maybe you start to go, oh, maybe I'm not such a good person. There's all this thought stuff that happens in there. And then you get further and further down the rabbit hole, and you kind of go, that person's really awful. They're totally awful. My God, they're so horrible. How is it that they have any friends? You know, I don't understand. This is what happens, isn't it? You know, we all have it, unfortunately. You know, so you kind of spiral like this until you find yourself upset. So you find yourself upset, and then it keeps going, and you don't just leave it at upset. You then start to go, right, so what am I going to do to get that person back? Because if I get that person back, then I'll be happy because I'll have retained control over my situation, and da 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 da. So, you know, they deserve some harm in response. So this is all improper mental attention that's happened here, until it gets to the point where you're quite angry. You've developed that intention to harm, ill will towards that person. Once you have the ill will, really, you've got the anger there. Once you have the anger, all sorts of faults occur. So as soon as you have anger, you haven't even done anything, you haven't said anything, all you've got is that ill will in your mind. You've already created the causes for future suffering for yourself, even if you haven't actually physically or verbally harmed anybody else. You've also increased that propensity for anger. So you've increased the propensity for you to create future causes for suffering for yourself as well. Plus, with anger, one of the big, massive faults of anger is it destroys your roots of virtue. So you also then have already, just through generating anger, you will have probably destroyed some kind of roots of virtue. So some kind of causes for future happiness for yourself. So depending on the person who you get angry at, then you will destroy either a greater amount or a lesser amount of roots of virtue. But we don't know what kind of person that person is. For example, they might actually be a bodhisattva. They might even be a Buddha. So if the object that you get angry towards is like a very weighty object in the sense of their own mental development, so they've already developed, you know, amazing states of mind within themselves, then getting angry at that person is going to create, you know, be much worse for you because it's going to destroy even more roots of virtue. So not only have you created future causes of suffering for yourself, you've also you've eliminated from your continuum causes for happiness for yourself. And that's just through getting angry, not through doing anything. And then you do something, like you say something out of anger, or, you know, when it gets really bad, people hit other people, people even kill other people. And then you've created even more causes for suffering, rebirths in the lower realms. Yeah, so all of this comes about in dependence upon what we say, improper mental attention. That's what we can fix, you know, we can do something about it. Once it gets too upset, you might still be able to pull it back a bit. Once it gets to anger, it's very hard to pull back from anger in the moment. It's like once you get angry, it's really that maybe the best thing to do is to go for a walk or something and remove yourself from that situation. So at least you don't create the extra causes of suffering through saying something negative or, you know, physical violence. Yeah. But what we can do something about is that improper mental attention. So the way that we do something about that is we challenge it. We want to challenge it. So we want to challenge it. Is the way that I'm thinking actually correct? Is it supported by correct reasoning? Or is there actually another way to think that is supported by correct reasoning? Because it's all based on this idea that people have control over their actions, this improper mental attention, isn't it? We think that other people, when they say things negative to us, we think that they're doing it in, you know, from a controlled way, you know, from a controlled sort of some mastery over themselves. But we know from our own experience that when we say something bad to another person, we don't do it because we have control over our minds and we're like, you know, we understand, you know, we think, oh yeah, this is definitely going to be a way that I'm going to accumulate happiness, the causes for happiness. You know, it doesn't come from that, does it? It comes from wrong ways of thinking, and it comes from anger and pride and jealousy taking over our mind. Because if we really, you know, approached every situation where, you know, we come across other people with a really good understanding of what is it that creates the causes for happiness for myself and for others, then we would, you know, never do anything negative towards others. We'd only do positive things towards others. We really understood that. But instead, it's like through not understanding that, having an intellectual understanding, but not really understanding it deeply within our own minds, and then being, you know, subject to attachment and anger and pride and jealousy, then we lash out at other people. So that's what happens for ourselves. Why is it that we expect other people to have control over their minds? So we're just all in this together.
That is a great safe in a way. Keep that perspective. It's very helpful. And also not to be too invested in your own story. And I mean, I could teach you this as well. I mean, as well as the teacher.
Yeah, you definitely can. If you have like a good ability to use reason yourself, a good power of analysis, then you can use these things.
It's been really good for me to be able to create some of that spaciousness. But not be so image that you can't step back from it.
Yeah.
And as you're saying, step back.
And what's what we want to try and do is create this kind of this gap for ourselves. So a gap between the event that happens and our reaction to that event. So that creating that gap there really depends on how much we've already understood, you know, about what are the causes for happiness, what are the causes for suffering, you know, how mind works, how, you know, the afflictions control the mind, you know, how sentient beings or, you know, ordinary sentient beings exist, how they, you know, how they go about doing activities, actions, and so forth. So through understanding that, we can create this little bit of a gap between the event and then all the spiraling that happens next. So we create this opportunity for ourselves to reassess that situation, that event that's just occurred, and see, have a think, is there another way that I can approach this in my mind that doesn't lead to me getting upset and doesn't lead to me getting angry? And the more familiarity that we have with doing that, then the easier it will be. We won't have that straight away. You know, at the moment, it's like event. There's quite a bit of stuff that happens in our mind, but it happens very quickly, upset, and then anger.
I think that whole stuff about the 3 points has been one of the biggest.
Yeah, that's excellent. You can understand about how the 3 poisons arise and how to antidote those 3 poisons. So even if you can just, like at the start, probably what will happen for us is like the event will happen and we won't be able to maybe counteract that improper mental attention that happens next. But we might be able to at least have some thoughts come up. You know, there might be some thoughts that think, actually, I'm reacting in a way that's not helpful. The way I should really be reacting is with compassion, with loving kindness to this person. So even just having that thought arise in your mind at that time, that's a really good sign. But it's a sign that you've understood and you started to familiarize your mind a little bit with a positive way of thinking, with a correct way of thinking, correct reasons. So we just need to like increase that more and more, our understanding and our practice of loving kindness and compassion to the point where that is our natural way of thinking. This is all to do with familiarization, habituation. So that becomes our natural way of thinking, so that any event like that, instead of automatically sending us down this rabbit hole of improper mental attention to upset and anger, it's like you have a difficult event, somebody is mean to you, and your automatic reaction is compassion and loving kindness. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? To be able to develop that kind of familiarity.
Well, it just makes me a bit tearful. I'm kind of crying.
And also what you said about that we don't we assume that the other person is doing the action of their own free will or and I'm wondering if that's a comforting thought and it justifies, wrongly justifies. It's like, okay, they're doing that by choice, so this is my response, instead of being like, actually, my response is not good, instead of taking responsibility to justify response.
It's probably a bit of a mutual assistance, isn't it? It's like we might not initially think it's like the justification for anger, but it's like independence upon that anger arises, and then you think, yeah, I'm justified in being angry because, you know, this is what they totally did, as you say, from their own free will that they did to me, this concrete me, independent me. Not the me that's imputed independence upon the body and mind, but this concrete, solid me that exists here that's being harmed. In fact, somebody says something negative to you, what's actually being harmed?
Well, if it's able to stop and think about it now, because there is a die, but it's also, if there is a hurt, it's generated from my own side, it's from my own thinking, my own attachment to my ego. So it's all mind, not dead. There's the words, and they are just words. And then I add that whole story.
So it's really just conditions. Yeah, that's right. And if you take the logic further, like you were saying, it's harmed my ego in some way. So that's really interesting. So you follow that logically and think, okay, so if something harms your ego or your pride, is that a benefit to you or a harm to you?
Well, being attached to the grasping and I'm answering your question for us taking here and left here, but the less attachment to the and aversion and attachment, so the less I am grasping everything, then the less those words. I could have gone on a random. Sorry, I went down the very unique little rabbit hole.
No, it's still on the point. So So like if somebody says something nasty to you and you think, well, that hurts me. Why does it hurt me? They're just words. How does it hurt me? It hurts me in the sense that I have this puffed up sense of who I am, and somehow that has hurt that puffed up sense. I mean, we don't sort of think of it as being puffed up sense. We just think that's how we are. So that's hurt me in some way. What it's done is hurt your pride. It's hurt your attachment to yourself as being something really special. Maybe even it's like you're thinking, well, it's hurt my reputation because other people have heard that. So that's all to do with pride again. So if something comes along and hurts your pride or your attachment to your sense of your being yourself of being something really special, brought you down a peg because of their words, is that a benefit to you or harm to you?
It could be a benefit, because without that person being a sort of a, if you're on your own and there's no one else there to kind of trigger you, you haven't really got the opportunity to address your own, pride, jealousy, all of these negative emotions without that person.
Yeah.
So it could be a benefit in that it's giving you the opportunity to address that.
Yeah. It's like holding up a mirror to yourself, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so it can be beneficial for you in that way. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree.
It may not be what people want to see or hear.
Yeah.
Maybe an ugly thing we're seeing in the mirror that we don't really want to see.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to see themselves as being ugly, not in a physical sense.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see themselves as ugly in a physical sense, of course, but nobody wants to see themselves as ugly in a personality kind of sense. Yeah. Yeah. So would you agree? Agree?
Yes, and yes, I mean, at the point of the parent, sorry, I was thinking, is it beneficial or is it not beneficial? Depending on how we respond. So
when you say it could be not beneficial, why would you say it's not beneficial?
Well, it's not beneficial if I respond in this. So their actions are their actions. It's my response to their actions can be not beneficial. It could be either beneficial by taking that time to reflect or analyse, or if I can do that first and be very okay, that's opportunity actions, or it could be not beneficial, but in fact it's my mind that's not beneficial, not it.
Yeah. Yeah. So your way of thinking might be not beneficial because you use it as another way to, think badly about that person, for instance. So that's not beneficial, but that's your way of thinking that's not beneficial. That action itself of saying something mean that essentially harms your pride, harms your attachment of yourself. Got to think of it from a Dharma perspective. This is why it's quite interesting when you start to think of these mind training practices. They don't necessarily make sense in a worldly context, right?
But is it the third option? It's not good or bad. It's just neutral in events.
I'd say it's necessarily beneficial. That's what I reckon. I mean, and even if what you're saying is true, like if you start reacting to that in a negative way, that's not beneficial. But from a Dharma perspective, as Dharma practitioners, we need to try and use every single opportunity to train our minds, use everything as like food for increasing our mental development. So anytime anybody says something negative to you, you can see that as an opportunity for being like a way to decrease our pride, to decrease our attachment to ourselves. Because you cannot attain the state of a Buddha. You can't even attain the state of liberation with pride. Afflicted pride, it's something that has to go. It absolutely has to go. It's one of the afflictive obscurations. It's one of the causes for suffering. So if there is an opportunity that presents itself for us to actually decrease our pride, to decrease our attachment to ourselves, then that's actually something that is of benefit to ourselves. We might not be able to, grasp and take hold of that opportunity and use it, but it's still an opportunity for that. I mean, it's quite hard to, get it in our minds. It's quite difficult because you want to kind of push back, right? You really want to push back. But when you think about these like bodhisattvas who have started to abandon the afflictive obscurations, even bodhisattvas lower than that, but let's look at those ones who've started to abandon their pride. They've started to abandon their attachment. Or those Hinayana practitioners who have started to abandon those things, they're going to be extremely humble people. It won't bother them like a single jot if someone says something negative to them. It just won't bother them. In fact, they'll see it as something that's beneficial. There's like a story in the Long Rim about there was one like very realized Lama who must have left his monastery where he was teaching. He ended up living with an old lady, and he was basically her servant, and he'd clean out her, her teapot and all of that kind of thing. And she didn't know who he was, so she treated him quite badly. And then one day some of his students turned up and showed him great veneration. And she realized who this like really realized person was that had been just cleaning out all her, poo and pee and stuff like that. And she was so embarrassed and she ran away, But this is like the kind of humility that we need to be able to develop. And it's like it might, to us now, being very sort of, we've got a lot of pride, we've got a lot of attachment to ourselves. That might seem as something that's inconceivable to be able to do for a complete stranger. But actually, to have, if you think about it, to have that kind of mind where you are so humble that you have no attachment to your own, ego or your own sort of reputation. Amazing, right? You've got none of this, like what we call improper mental attention. There's none of that rabbit hole stuff. The mind is very peaceful, very calm. It's not at all ruffled by the afflictions. So that's what we want to aim for. The only way to get there is through familiarity. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and all of a sudden you're going to have that mind. It's impossible, right? This is something that happens over a long period of time, familiarization. But what we can do now is we can at least start to see.
Really well giving up ideas about yourself.
Yeah, exactly. But that will come slowly, slowly. It's not like we have to be able to do this tomorrow, but we have to just start, at least start to change our attitude so that, one thing we need to start to practice to change that improper mental attention, the rabbit hole thing, which we do through training in loving kindness and compassion and understanding how other sentient beings are controlled by their afflictions like we are. So we need to do it like that. But also what we need to start to train our mind to think, to see every opportunity, every event that is a negative event as an opportunity to practice Dharma.
Be curious.
Exactly. I think that's really important, actually, to ask questions of ourselves, not just kind of think, oh, I mean, it is at least good to think, I'm supposed to be a Dharma practitioner. I should be reacting in a different way here. That's a good thing. But if we can go deeper and actually start to question, why am I reacting in this way? Is that actually a correct way or not? What would be a correct way? What are the reasons that support that? Then it becomes very stable. So if we can at least start to change our attitude towards these difficult events in our life, so we see them instead of as being things that cause us suffering, to see them as things that cause us or give us opportunity to improve our minds. I mean, that's a start, isn't it? That's where we start, and then we just keep working at it. Some life events are more difficult than others. Some are very big ones, and it's quite hard. It'll take you a long time to maybe shift your way of thinking, but at least holding in your mind those ones that you can't deal with right now, change your way of thinking right now, to at least hold in your mind to think, this is an opportunity. I have to find a way to work with this to at least have, a slightly better reaction to this very difficult life event. What is a slightly better way? Where can I start? With the smaller ones, we can start straight away. We can probably overcome them much more easily. Yeah. It's like, if somebody cuts you off in traffic, that's not too difficult, right? It's like through habituation, we get annoyed automatically. Although I've got to say in Perth, everybody's like really nice on the roads. Oh my God, yeah. Compared to like Melbourne and Brisbane, people just do whatever they want in those cities. Here they fall back to let you in, and things like, it's outrageous, you know. Sometimes I find myself driving like I was in Melbourne or something. You've got to be quite aggressive driver to make sure you get where you want to go. And I feel like, no, here that's not how it's done. You know, everybody just lets each other go. It's amazing, right? But still,
It used to be even better.
I mean, I'm sure it will change. But you know, if somebody does cut you off in traffic, you can more easily sort of think about, well, what's another way I can think about this? They've probably got something really pressing on. Even if they don't have something pressing on, you know, it's like, it's not going to work out well for them to have this mind that's like so focused on their own goals at the expense of other people. It's a little bit easier, right?
Could be that's what you're observing a lot more. You're noticing that. Like if you want to buy a particular car, you see lots of those particular cars.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah. So, yes. So this is kind of how we need to start to approach our practice in terms of our daily lives. Because every day we come across difficulties one way or another. It might be just like, you know, personal little niggles and stuff like that with our body or our mind. Sometimes they're bigger ones, interactions with other people. Sometimes they're really massive life events. There's all sorts of different ones we have to work with. But the approach is the same. So last week we were looking at, you know, how we go about developing the mind of enlightenment. And so this is like a sort of our big life's work, isn't it? But all these practices, all these stages that we go through, they're applicable in a daily, you know, just in a daily life. So for instance, you know, we're looking at computer around. I don't know if you're going to be able to see the whiteboard very clearly. Sort of see it a bit. Okay. So when we talk about developing the mind and body teacher, so this is something that Cherokee for sure has been talking about. So we've got the sevenfold cause and effect instruction, which I mentioned briefly last week. I won't go into it in detail because I'm figuring there's like probably had teachings on it before, and we don't have very much time to go through all this in detail. But when we talk about generating the mind of the mind, this is a very powerful mind that is focused on other beings and their needs ahead of my own. So really the only way to develop that is to, first off, we have to develop a sense of finding others appealing. Right? Unless you find another person appealing, it's quite hard to develop that mind, generate that mind that wishes them to be happy, that wishes them to be free of suffering. You know, if you think about somebody who really gets under your skin, who's a very difficult person, and probably your mind is quite set against them, that person, all you can see is the negative stuff in them. You find it very difficult to see the positive ones. You probably kind of go, if you can see a positive quality, you go, yeah, they are quite good at that, but, and then you have to go and list all the negative stuff that you see about them. Whereas their friends probably only see the positive stuff. They don't see the negative stuff, or they might see it and they don't pay attention to it. It's not such a big deal. All these positive qualities that have outweigh the negative ones, right? So they're able to, their friends to this person that you find really difficult will be quite a lot more, they'll find it a lot more easy to just be generous to that person, to do things that give them happiness, for instance. For us ourselves, you see that little positive quality, but it's just not enough. It's not enough for us to just naturally kind of go and benefit them in some way, is it? Because you're holding back because of all that negative. They don't deserve it because of all that negative stuff that they do. In fact, everybody deserves happiness. Everybody has an equal deservingness of happiness and equal deservingness of suffering. I mean, of not having suffering. Yeah. So in terms of this sevenfold cause and effect technique, we've got the first 6 stages of recognizing sentient beings. There's no sentient being that's not good. Recollecting their kindness, so thinking about how when they were around others, how kind they were to us, carrying us in their stomach with 9.5 months, however long it is, and all the care things they did for us so that our life would be sustainable. Regardless of their intention, doesn't matter. Still, we got a great benefit from it. You know, those of you who've had kids, right, you know the physical changes that happen to the body. The difficulty of raising kids, goodness, it's not easy. It's not an easy task at all. Kids are very, very demanding because they only sort of think of their own sort of world, isn't it? And you've got to try and impart to them that you need to have a wider world, think of others as well. And then they go through the teenage years, and that seems like I don't know how many parents survive teenage years, honestly. So there's like so many things that our parents do for us, regardless of their intention, that are of benefit to us, that sustain our lives, that have allowed us to be, you know, in the position that we are today. So thinking of their kindness, then that naturally makes us want to repay that kindness. So these three steps, the recognizing, reflecting their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, is a way in which we can start to see all sentient things, regardless of whether they're in this life close to us, distant from us, they're strangers. We can start to see all of them as being appealing. Focus on those appealings. So it's only through really starting to see other beings as being appealing that then we can develop that, naturally, that wish to do something in return for them comes about. What do they want? They want happiness. So that's why loving kindness comes about in different things too. So the reason why we use these three is because they can be applied to all sentient beings. You do have to think about past and future lives, but if you think about it logically, you can come to the conclusion, yes, we've had past lives. Then logically from that, say we have been beginningless, and then logically from that, we've had a mother in pretty much all of those previous lives, and it won't always been the same mother. So we can say there's no sentient being who has not been, or someone like him. Yeah. So we can apply that across the board. We don't have to sort of look at each sentient being and think, what are their positive qualities? That just apply across the board. So that's why this kind of technique is used here. So recognizing sentient beings, others, recollecting the kindness, wishing to repay the kindness. Through developing those three, you have that, you're able to see sentient beings as being healing. That's why we talk about this loving kindness, the fourth step as being affectionate loving kindness. So that affectionate refers to having seen beings as appealing, then developing that wish for them to be happy. And when you have that wish for them to be happy, naturally what arises from that is a wish for them to be free from suffering, which is compassion. And then we're talking about that compassion that sees all sentient beings, so all suffering sentient beings, wishes them to be free from suffering. The next step is actually to not just have the wish, but to take on that responsibility of freeing them from suffering. And that's what we call the highest intention. So once you have that highest intention, that's the point at which you have the, kind of perfected the cause for developing the mind. When you're actually taking on that responsibility that seeks to free sentient beings from suffering, then you're thinking, well, where is it possible to do that? Where can I achieve that? I can do it a little bit now, but I don't have the excellent ability to help all sentient beings. In order to be able to help all sentient beings effortlessly, I really need to do enlightenment. And so then naturally from that, the result arises, which we have got this mind of enlightenment. So the mind that seeks to attain. And that's where you really start with the mind of activities. So that's just like a very brief I'd say introduction, but you've already had an introduction, I'm sure, to that. That's just like a brief recap of how you develop that mind of enlightenment. I was going to talk about some other things with respect to the mind of enlightenment. We've only got a couple of minutes, so maybe I won't go into it. Do you have any questions?
you really feel into, when I really feel into, it does take away a lot of me. In the sense of what one has already received.
And how do you mean?
Well, we're fine. We're independent, aren't we? Doing our thing, you know, whatever it is, and being who we are. But it makes me pause when I think about all the work that has to just keep me alive and breathing.
Yeah, that's right.
And all the stuff you talked about last week, you know, like, it does reduce your own self-importance.
We think it, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are the center of our own universe, basically, aren't we? To ourselves. You know, we're the most important. We think that somehow we exist independently of everybody else. But actually, you know, we're very much dependent on all these other beings. I mean, we can think about it in terms of past lives. All the mothers that have put in so much time and effort to take care of us, to make sure our lives are protected so that, you know, we can live that life to its full ability, full potential. But using our mother of this life as a basis. But even outside of that, you know, thinking about how sentient beings, we depend upon sentient beings even when they're not our mothers. I think I mentioned this, was it the first class? I can't remember. You know, thinking about this, like this massive web of interdependence in the world today. All the clothes that we wear, all the food that we eat, you know, even the quality of the air that we breathe, the quality of the water that we drink, all depends on so many beings. All the beings that create these things, the people who are involved in the logistics of ferrying things to and fro, all the beings in the earth that create, you know, good sustenance for plants to grow so that we have food, for instance. The birds that then, you know, eat fruit and then take the seeds to other places. The bees that cross-pollinate plants. There's so much that goes on that we benefit from. Some of the things we benefit directly, some of them we benefit from indirectly, but you know, it's like we're so linked into this kind of web of interdependence throughout the entire world. And, you know, by extension, you can probably say the universe. Right? It's quite incredible.
We talk about familiarization. If we hold that in front of them, I hold that in front of my eye a lot more. That will change a lot.
Yeah.
That one. Is that one.
It's all dependent on our familiarization. That's right. Yeah. So we've got to, it's like, you know, our minds are going in one direction, which is all based on like, I am this independent person. I am the most important. I'm the most important person entirely in the whole world. You know, that's what we've been thinking from beginningless lives until now. Yeah. Yeah. You know, some people we kind of think maybe are a little bit more important than ourselves, like our teachers, our lamas, for instance. But even then, it's really all to do with me, isn't it? They're my lama, so they're the most important because they're my teacher, my lama. We're still the center of all of that. Yeah. So we need to, it's like turning around a tractor that's going in one direction, you know, with like a little thread. But the more that we familiarize, the more that we practice, the more that we study, the more that we think about these things, it's like we're adding to the strength of that thread and we're slowly changing our attitude like that. It's all about familiarization. So it's good, whatever we do, like when we eat our food, even when you dress yourself in the morning, you can think about how having these clothes depended upon all these many sentient beings to create just this one piece of cloth that I'm wearing now. Thinking like that can be extremely helpful to our minds, whatever we can do to familiarize. All right, well, it's 1 o'clock, so let's leave it there for today. Right, we shall recite the prayers on page 8. Gyawadi nyudu da lama tsange drugyune drowa chikyamalupa te salakupa shu chanchu sencho rinpoche ma gyepa nam gyegyuchi gyepa nyamba mepa yang gone gondu pawa shu Toni dawa rinpoche ma gyepa nam gyegyuchi gyepa nyamba mepa yi Ona Gondu Power Show. Okay, over the page. Prayer for the Dalai Lama. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. May you have a long life and all your wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Savior of the Land of Snow teachings and transmigratory beings, who extensively clarifies the path that unifies emptiness and compassion. To the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armour of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make requests. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all beings and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory of fortunate disciples. Lord of Dharma, who in accordance with the various dispositions of those to be subdued, makes clear in the light of your well-spoken advice the sacred founding tradition, essence of the Buddha's teachings. Foremost and holy Lama, to you who are supreme, we make this prayer of supplication. Lama, please live long. And then over the page, the request for the Lama to remain long. May my perfect Guru's life be long and his white actions flourish in the 10 directions. May the torch of the teachings of Losam Drapa always remain, dispelling the darkness of transmigratory beings. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, stop recording.